You're tuned in to a one-take
podcast production.
Alright guys, what is up? This is the first episode of the Fantasy Football Press Coverage Podcast, the official podcast of GoingFor2.com. I am your host, CEO, founder, and writer for GoingFor2.com. I'd like to thank you today for pressing play. I really appreciate that, and I'd also like to thank One Take Podcast Nation for allowing me to produce these podcasts under their umbrella. Of course, you may know by now we have a partnership with them, and so hoping to do some big things for all of the listeners out there and the readers of GoingFor2.com. To bring you some great content, sports related, fantasy related, whatever the case may be. You could follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Jeff Lambert77. That's Jeff spelled Geoff. You can subscribe to these podcasts, of course, on iTunes, on Spreaker, or just by going to our site at onetakepodcastnation.com. Or you can go to goingfor2.com, and I've got links up there for the site as well. So lots of ways you can find us. So please subscribe to whatever service you use for your podcasts. And we do appreciate you listening. All right, so let me give you a little recap of what this show is going to be about. Basically, during the season, we'll try to do these podcasts once a week. We'll touch on all the fantasy news, fantasy relevant news. We'll talk about, waiver wires and sit-start advice, trade advice. Basically, anything fantasy related, we'll make sure we touch on once a week. Of course, we are just coming up on August, which is, of course, fantasy football drafting season. So for the next few weeks, these podcasts will be on, different things coming out of training camps, different players that are rising up draft boards, players to look out for, players that maybe are high on draft boards that aren't playing so well, that maybe we need to lower down, depending on the news coming out of camps, Basically that kind of stuff. We'll just kind of touch on all of it, give you the fantasy impact. I'll give you my advice, We'll also be taking some listeners' email questions. You can go to my site, goingfor2.com, click on the link on the main page. It says submit a question. That goes directly to my inbox, and I will compile all the questions that I think should be answered, should be talked about, and we'll bring it to the show. Alright, now that all that intro stuff is out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the show.
News and notes from around the league.
Alright, so we'll get into the first note here, and of course it's the one that everyone is talking about right now, and that's the Tom Brady suspension. I do think there is one thing that hasn't been discussed a lot. Everyone that's drafting Tom Brady or consider drafting Tom Brady is just assuming he's going to miss those first 4 games. And they're drafting their other quarterback that's going to fill in for those first 4 games, with that in mind. But there is the potential that Tom Brady files for an injunction. And what does an injunction mean? It basically means that until everything is fully decided in court, because he will be fighting this in court, he will actually be able to play. So basically he could start, week 1, he could start week 2, week 3, he could even go up to like week 5, 6, 7, 8, depending how long this court battle goes on, and this entire time Tom Brady's playing, which is great as a fantasy owner, except if he ends up losing this court case, guess what? The 4-game suspension will go into effect that same day. So let's say he, starts the first 7-8 weeks of the season. Week 8, he loses his court case. Well, guess what? He's going to serve his 4-game suspension right there. So he'll miss weeks 9, 10, 11, and 12, which those are 4 games leading up to the fantasy playoffs. You're going to be, scraping by with a second quarterback, trying to make the playoffs. I think I would probably lower Tom Brady down quite a bit, probably down even to the number 2 quarterback range. I would draft your number 1 quarterback, wherever you decide you want to take your quarterback, whether you go early or whether you'd like to wait a little while and then take Tom Brady as almost a bench quarterback. And then if he gives you anything, throughout the season, I would take that. Of course, depending on how your draft goes and your draft league mates, that may not be a possibility. I think personally in my drafts, I'm avoiding Tom Brady. Let somebody else deal with him. I dealt with the whole Adrian Peterson thing last year, and believe me, it's not fun, not knowing if your player is going to play and then eventually getting suspended for the entire season as AP did. Now, granted, Tom Brady won't get suspended for the whole season, but we don't know when those 4 games are going to come. Ideally, if this court case gets wrapped up quick, which court cases never do, it could get thrown out and you'd have Tom Brady for the whole season. But it's the uncertainty that you got to worry about there. All right, the next thing, of course, is another suspension we got. We got Le'Veon Bell's suspension being reduced by 1 game. Of course, his original suspension was for 3 games, been reduced to 2. I don't know if that dramatically improves his draft value. I mean, he was going, 3, 4, or 5 in most drafts that I've been in anyway. So I don't know how he could be any better unless he was to just have no suspension at all, in which case I think he might be number 1 or number 2 overall. But just the 1 game really ain't going to impact his fantasy stats too much. Just means 1 less game you got to have a backup for. Be that D'Angelo Williams, or if you're drafting another running back entirely to fill in for those first few games. I don't think it really impacts too much in the fantasy world, which is the 1 game reduction. Of course, it does help the Steelers, in the real world, but I think for fantasy purposes, I don't think it does too much to his draft stock. And then we got the Justin Hunter situation, which we don't really have a whole lot of clarity on yet. We don't know if the NFL is going to suspend him. We don't really know exactly what happened. We're hearing reports that he sucker punched somebody, broke his jaw, whatever the case may be. Justin Hunter is not really fantasy relevant in the sense that I think he's probably going late rounds, if at all. And he's probably, being picked up maybe in deeper leagues. But where I think it does have some fantasy relevance is I think with the other receivers on that team. With Kendall Wright, with Green Beckham, the rookie. I think it, slightly bumps up their value a little bit. They'll have to carry more of the Justin Hunter role, which quite honestly last year wasn't much of a role. I know I was high on him last year, and I drafted him in most of my drafts, and by the middle of the season, he was on the waiver wire. So, Justin Hunter, who knows what's going to happen with the whole thing with the bar fight and the suspension, the whole 9. But just to keep that in mind, it might increase the value a little bit of Kendall Wright and the rookie Green Beckham. Another note I got here is a note saying that Sam Bradford, should be ready to go by training camp. And that's fantasy relevant in the sense that if he ends up winning that starting job, the Eagles quarterback has had some value since Chip Kelly got there. Whether it's going to be Mark Sanchez or whether it's going to be Sam Bradford, I think, fantasy relevance is definitely there. I actually have a note here that I've written down. It's a quote from Matthew Berry, of course, from ESPN. Just to kind of give you an idea of how valuable that Eagles quarterback can be. Since Chip Kelly took over in 2013, Eagles quarterbacks have combined to score 594 fantasy points, which amounts to 18.6 per game. During that span, the only quarterbacks with more fantasy points than the quote-unquote Eagles QB, whether it was Sanchez, whether it was Foles, whoever, if we group that into one QB, the only quarterbacks to score more over that time since Chip Kelly got there, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, and Andrew Luck. Now, I'm not trying to say that Sam Bradford's going to be in that category. Of course, Foles had a big part of that. He had a huge season, 2 years ago. But it is relevant in the sense that if you like to wait on quarterbacks, and if Sam Bradford is definitely named the starter before the start of the season, it could be a sneaky pickup. Because if he can put up anything like the last two quarterbacks, the Sanchez's and the Nick Foles did in that Chip Kelly offense, Sam Bradford could definitely be a steal going late. And then of course we have the news about RG3, the whole worst quarterback in the league talk that's going through. I think it was Sporting News that first did this survey, basically saying that they surveyed a bunch of GMs and executives around the league, and Robert Griffin III, I believe, was ranked the 28th quarterback overall. And then some anonymous source actually came out and said that he thought Robert Griffin was done, that the knee issues he just can't overcome, and his ego won't allow him to build himself back up to become a good quarterback. Now, I mean, all that is definitely a possibility, I guess. You could say that it's possible that his career is over. But I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm hearing a lot of good things coming out of camps. Now, I don't know if RG3 will ever be 2012 RG3 again, but I have been hearing that he's making a lot of progress as a pocket passer, which I think he's going to have to become, at least to some extent. I think the threat of the run will always be there. But if he can become more of like a Steve Young, where the threat of the run was there, but you really had to respect the pass as well, I think RG3 could definitely benefit from that kind of quarterbacking. I think his days of being a quote-unquote running quarterback are pretty much over. He has to learn to protect himself because he is just too fragile to be out there taking those vicious hits that he takes. So yeah, do I think RG3 is done? No, I don't. Do I think he's a top tier fantasy quarterback again? No, I don't think that either. But I don't think he's done. I don't think what we saw in 2012 is completely an aberration. I think he can recapture that, just given the right situation. So again, late quarterback. He's down there, he's not being drafted in a lot of leagues, or he's being drafted in 2 quarterback leagues, or as a backup. The potential is there. I mean, we saw it just 2 years ago. This guy was, one of the top quarterbacks in fantasy. So it's not out of the realm of the possibility that he can actually become that again. The next thing I got here is Mike Triplett. He's a beat reporter for the New Orleans Saints. Came out and said that he expects C.J. Spiller to catch 60 or more passes this year, playing in that Pierre Thomas, Darren Sproles type role for New Orleans Saints. Be completely honest with you, when Spiller went to New Orleans, it didn't really make ripples as far as my perspective on C.J. Spiller. But hearing this news, and actually when I think about it, New Orleans Saints have always been like this. They got Mark Ingram, who you would think would be the one that's going to be the lead back. But the Saints have always been the three-headed monster type of team. They'll have 2 or 3 running backs that all specialize in different things. So I could definitely see a situation where Spiller is the first and second down back, and Mark Ingram is the first and second down back, and then Spiller comes in for the third down for the passing plays. And of course with the Saints, first and second down could be a passing play. So Spiller could come in on first and second down, and it would be a passing play. And they can also, obviously give him the ball as well, because he's definitely shown that he can run the ball. The main thing is him just staying healthy. And that's been a problem throughout his career. He's shown flashes in Buffalo, the big playability. But it's just he can't stay on the field. So maybe a change of scenery will help him out. And if 60 catches is actually a possibility, which looking at Pierre Thomas's stats over the last few years and Darren Sproles when he was there, 60 is actually a very good number for C.J. Spiller to attain. And of course, with Kenny Stills gone and Jimmy Graham gone, there's a ton of targets to go around. So why not Spiller? I don't think the other receivers there, I don't think Colston or Brandon Cook